Before I start the video, bear in mind this quote from Aldous Huxley. Self-consciousness is the indispensable means to enlightenment. At the same time, it is the greatest obstacle in the way. At the end, I will add as sort of a postscript this little essay I typed quickly. Enjoy the video. What's going on, guys? Read and reflect here. Trying something different today. I'm on my way to class, and I've never done a video while I'm driving. And I posted just a couple of days ago, but one of my viewers posted an excellent comment on my video about the secrets of poetry, and it had to do with something that pops up in Jung's writings, namely participation mystique, which actually goes back to the anthropologist Lucien Lévi-Bleu. And Jung kind of made this term his own to explain a psychological and spiritual problem that is just horridly common and prevalent. It seems to afflict a lot of people, and often they don't ever wake up to it. And literally translated, participation mystique means mystic participation. Jung also calls it mystic identification. And this, as I hope to bring up at some point in this video, is quite like what Huxley calls substitutes for liberation. That to each human being, there's the possibility of a kind of religious function being carried out whereby that individual has a balanced and effective psychic mode of being. That is, his psyche is in proper circulation, proper regulation. He's able to get shit done and do things and be a part of life and really soak it in and enjoy it, because he doesn't fall into what Lévi-Bleu and Jung call participation mystique, which is the way, I can't remember if Jung himself said this, but this is how I like to think of it. It's a state of being where one is mystically enchanted by something. And the way I see it, this could be any number of things. I extend it even to thoughts and feelings, that you get caught up in identity with certain thoughts and feelings that are morbid or neurotic. But also, Jung talks about it quite a lot in the context of the state and doctrine, all of these outside possible objects of the identification. It's essentially whatever it is that you have latched onto and become really attached to. You're investing all of this emotion and intelligence and energy that you have, that you could be keeping for yourself in a way that, on the one hand, enriches your spiritual life, and because of that, consequently, you become a more productive member of society, because you don't unconsciously fall into this morbid condition that quite a lot of people fall into. And I think, if we're being honest, it's virtually everyone at first, which is why we hear of a fall of man, and there's the good Adam and then the bad Adam. And basically, with age, the more we become self-conscious, and self-consciousness is a very important thing I want to talk about in this video. We have this increasing sense of our own individuality, and at some point it seems to reach a pitch where it becomes morbid and pathological, and consequently you go out looking for some solution to this, because inside, emotionally, psychically, you're not feeling so hot, or you're maybe not performing very effectively in the daily motions. So I don't think Jung was very much opposed to the idea, or the fact rather, that human beings can be mystically enchanted, but he saw that if you look for that enchantment and feeling of a wholeness and bliss inside, and some improper object that is more or less just going to steal your soul, if you don't fall into that trap, then you retain your soul. He has a book called Modern Man in Search of a Soul, and I can't remember, it might have been it was on YouTube. I like to read YouTube comments sometimes. They can be really funny or even very insightful. And where was I going with that? Modern Man in Search of a Soul. I don't know if this is the thing I was trying to remember, but somebody said that Jung is downplayed so much and people don't really accept him as a valid thinker and psychiatrist is because he saw it to just be fundamentally true that human beings have a soul, or a soul reality, a spiritual life, that if they don't attend to it and facilitate its growth in the right ways very carefully, which almost requires it can require having other people in your life that are about that same goal, replenishing, rejuvenating one's own spirit, and having a really spiritual life. You may need other people to help you get to that, but also I think the experience of a religious sense of life, or something mysterious and meaningful and enriching, that can be a very spontaneous experience, and I like to think it comes to everybody at least once, and probably several times. That I suppose I should begin speaking about the whole aging process. I have kind of a little diagram written here in my notes. And the problem of participation mystique, of mystic enchantment with something or some notion, whatever it be, that you shouldn't be wrapped up in, this becomes a problem with age and with the heightening sense of individuality, and that one is an atom, a unit, just totally severed from everything, the whole world, universe, all life. That is how people almost inevitably become the more conscious they become with age. And it's this feeling of egohood, or egoity, of I myself, I who am not that person there, not all those other things, but I'm just an atomized unit of a person. And what happens here is we all do this with this growing sense that we have a personal identity. But like I said before, this can reach such a pitch where one's character and feeling for life just totally degenerates, and you suffer for it, and others suffer for it, because I mean, at least how I read them, Huxley and Jung were guys who saw the religious function, or what Huxley calls the unitive knowledge of the deity, they both saw this liberation and this conversion, basically, as not something that's just it's not just important for a few people, but it may actually be important for basically everybody. That unless somehow you have that sense of connection to the whole, and then one tends to become bitter and ineffective. And so what I'm trying to communicate, I don't even know if I told you guys what the diagram looks like, but basically, envisage a circle with a line extending from it, going up and to the right. And as you make your way from the base of this circle and go up and across, you're growing older, and this sense of egoity, of being I myself, I, not everything else and everybody else, but no, this particular person with this one single life that only I really see and experience from the inside. This growing sense it marks the alienation of oneself from what I believe both Huxley and Jung would probably call something like the primordial unity, or the unity of all things, which the child securely finds himself in. There's not really this strong sense of I-hood, I myself. It's just celebrating life and feeling the emotions that spontaneously pop up in you, and just not really feeling like a victim or a damned person for it, but you just are content even when you're lashing out and angry. Because that acute sense of consciousness, which someone like Dostoevsky in his Notes from Underground depicts and shows to be something so, he said it was a disease. Consciousness is a disease, and the more conscious one becomes, then the more diseased ridden you feel. And Schopenhauer, in his characteristic way of elevating the contemplative individual beyond the masses, says that the more intelligent and solitary one becomes, the more he suffers. The more he thinks about life's suffering, just all of it, as far as his mind can go. If you guys read On the Suffering of the World by Schopenhauer, it will scare the hell out of you that somebody could just think that way as a matter of course. He just highlights all the ugliness of life. And said there's a little class of thinkers called the antinatalists, and just based off the etymology, antinatalists is they're against the idea that people give birth to children at all, because this life is just so horrible and unworth it that you're just throwing an innocent, unsuspecting human being, namely your child, or soon-to-be child, into a world that's just shit, basically. And there's quite a few people for whom this way of thinking is a matter of course, and I confess I was quite like that for a while. Thus, I needed to look into religion and to look into Jung's psychology in particular, and you find some of that spiritual note in some other authors, psychological authors as well, like Maslow, Herbert Silber, who, by the way, I believe inspired Jung to get into alchemy. Eric Fromm. I can name a few, but some of the names are leaving my head at the moment. But I think that psychology or psychiatry generally has made a big mistake in basically forgetting about this spiritual note, this very personal note to the individual existence of a human being, that indeed he does see things that nobody else sees, and he feels emotions that nobody else feels in just the way that he does. I mean, the human drama that the Buddha speaks of, forgive me if I'm wrong, I think one begins, if you read his Four Noble Truths, in dukkha, which is basically life suffering, just unquenchable desire. It's human beings are basically hardwired to be desirous and to think that nothing is quite good enough insofar as one has been alienated from this primordial unity of life, the unity of all things. And that to ascend to the highest and truest way of living life requires a resignation from the desirous part of oneself that always looks everywhere and sees nothing to be good enough. You have to escape that, and this coincidentally would seem to have to entail something like a diminution or a lessening of one's attachment to one's own egohood or egoity. That I am the sufferer. I am the one who has to live as this human being for whom it's just inscribed that he suffered. You know, as he grows and becomes more conscious of himself. So, Huxley and Jung were two great thinkers, very much concerned with the religious function that's possible in a human being, and that, moreover, Jung thought to be the therapeutic effect par excellence that he would try to bring about in his patients that came into his office and that he worked with. A return, and here's something, I believe it's in his Eon. He says how the difference between ego and self is the same as the difference between quiz and quid, which those are Latin terms. He uses a lot of Latin and sometimes Greek in his books. Quiz is who, quid is what. And the unforgivable sin of all of us in our day is that we seem to have become at once uprooted and also uprooted from and unconscious of the what that we are. And principally, we are what before we ever become who. We, as I said, with the development of egohood and personal consciousness, that doesn't come until after childhood and after we've been a fetus and after, our parents even were born. And all of this backstory came before it. And what is that backstory that builds up and at last produces each of us individually as human beings? That's the what of life. And it's incredible, I think, how unconscious we are of this in our own day. It's the sense of I, especially, of course, in the West, is so pronounced. Sorry, somebody just stopped in front of me very unreasonably. Sense of I individuality. This comes after this whole unconscious backstory of which we were not at all conscious, even including childhood. We're barely conscious in childhood. We have probably some degree of a personal consciousness sort of thing, but it's try to remember many things from childhood. There will be maybe a couple of moments, and in adulthood we can basically tell the whole story of what's been happening to us. It's like, where were we then? That seems to be what Huxley and Jung, to my mind at least, consider to be our truest identity, and that which saves us from the morbidity of falling into participation mystique, a naive, mystical identification with things that you have no business identifying with. These are what Huxley calls substitutes for liberation. They don't give you that feeling of bliss and completion that a true religious connection with life and the invisible life brings you. There can be no replacement for that, and it's something that individuals have to do within themselves. And I think it does almost kind of require something like the Buddha taught, a recognition that we're basically hardwired to be dissatisfied with our lives the older we get and the more conscious we become of ourselves, because we get caught up in this narrativizing self, the narrator in us, who's just saying this happened and that happened, this occurs because of that, and just explaining everything away, and all the while just becoming completely detached from the immediate experience of life. What Huxley and I believe the Buddha and Pali Canon called suchness or tathagata. That it is very much possible to arrive at such an experience, and I think that this coincides quite a lot with Jung's method of psychiatry. Is that a patient comes in, there's some serious stuff that's going on with him, either internally or externally or both, and he's not really able to handle his emotions and thoughts so well, and he needs somebody there who cares about him and how he's doing and that he can talk to. Well, in the course of this procedure, Jung is trying to get these troubled individuals to recognize that they are a what far before they were ever an individual who, and that there is this incredibly vast backstory to each of our individual lives, and though we unconsciously, without knowing it, sever our identity with that backstory or background, it's no less true, and it actually has it is far more authoritative in what we do and think and feel and all of those things than we believe our egos to be. You can stop at any one moment and just notice what sort of sensations or thoughts or feelings, inspirations, whatever sort of internal stuff is happening. You can just stop and notice that and realize that forces far greater than yourself are making those happen, and moment to moment certain experiences or events, what have you, are being disclosed to you by these forces that transcend your personal will, are much more powerful than it, which is not to say that you don't have anything like personal will and an ability to make yours and others' lives flow more smoothly. I do believe people have that option, but that often we look for solutions of how to deal with our emotions and our feeling of disconnect with life and the world. We find these false substitutes for this genuine inward connection, which it had been the genius of religions always to bring about in their adherents. But now, in a more irreligious age, and we like to belittle it more and more, but all the while we're forgetting that the only reason they lasted and were prominent for so long, and still are to a great degree, is because they satisfy needs of the soul. And that's just another reason. I mean, it's the same reason I was saying before, I suppose, that Jung's work is downplayed, and people say it's too obscure and ethereal and abstruse, is that he recognized that that's what life is it's constant confusion followed by intervals of realization, and it's always oscillating between these opposites of knowing what we are and not knowing what we are, and remembering or forgetting our unity with life, and being satisfied with our situations versus not being satisfied. And that he tried in a scientific way to explain why religions were so effective at gaining people's adherence and faith, and more than that, worship, total devotion, such that the way that they speak is so modified by the religious doctrine. And it's because these people have a genuine inner connection to them. I mean, you can criticize people for having faith in anything, but I believe some people attain to that religious function of the psyche, as Jung called it, by way of conventional doctrines and institutions of religion, and that some people can get to it not necessarily involved directly with any certain doctrine or institution, but I think it may perhaps require that one have some familiarity with religious ideas in order that one attain to the mystic union, the primordial union, or unity, that is perfectly attainable within us, but that to no fault of our own, it's just something we have not considered much. I don't want to sound braggadocious, but I doubt any of you have really met anybody that talks in the sort of way about the sort of things that I do, i.e. psychology, the psyche, the unconscious, consciousness, human experience. That I'm probably the only one you guys know that talks about these things. And yet, if Jung and Huxley are right, they're of the utmost importance for, say, our not producing totalitarian societies again, not being rude and imbecilic to one another, and making each other suffer needlessly, because the circulation of our psyche is all out of whack. Because, I mean, if they are right, as I said, they see this unity of the individual person with his background, and the total backstory of his life, which is unbelievably and unspeakably vast, that his character will suffer for it because he feels he's an atomic unit and that he's all on his own. He's abandoned, as either Sartre or Heidegger would say. Abandonment is a very, very real state, and I've been there. If you read Dostoevsky's notes, or really just any of his books, almost always his protagonists are in that abandoned condition. That's why people consider him a kind of a religious or philosophic novelist whose books, or fictions rather, are permeated with essentially the very problems that Jung and Huxley try to address in their essays. That, merely reduce religion to being the opium of the masses, if you will. If you deny the religiosity, the mystical, the playful, the spiritual, the irrational, imaginative, if you deny all that in yourself, because really all those words that's what religion gets at so effectively, and none of the things out in the world can quite do it as effectively. You can belittle all of those aspects of yourself as a human being, but your character is probably suffering for it, and you're bringing needless suffering to yourself and others probably for it without realizing. Because, let's face it, this, until you read, as I said, either religious texts or the works of some of these authors who were very much concerned with religion, how can you learn these things? Who tells you that? For those who grow up in a church family and go to church regularly, it's like, well, you got it already. That's the whole function, is you're absolutely bound with God as a Christian. And you are perfectly reminded of that every Sunday. But for those who have lost connection with any particular religious institutions, it's you are abandoned and kind of on your own as to how to figure out how to execute this perfectly valid and healthy function of the psyche, which just so happens to perhaps demand some attentiveness and concern for one's own thoughts and imagination, and recognizing these as not one's own creation is how I read Jung, is that he perceives the whole stream of thought and experience to be autonomous, i.e. self-moving, and it's not we as egos who cause ourselves to feel this way or to think this thing or to have that dream. It's the whole stream is autonomous and natural. It's a natural happening. That can be observed and attended to more or less effectively, and if you do attend to it more effectively, then your character will respond in kind, and you will be a charming and warm presence to people, and even to yourself. But if you're not attentive to the stream of your lived experience, as much of it as you can possibly be aware of, and recognize that you should view your thoughts and feelings, emotions, what have you, from an even and objective sort of point of view. And coincidentally, people seem to awaken to this objective kind of consciousness and way of seeing things as a consequence of their conversion experiences, their aha moments of finding God. Because what happens there, you come in to touch with the what of life, the backstory, the total backstory of all life. You come in to connect with that in a way that's impossible for you to doubt. And then you may achieve a kind of grace in your life because you have allied yourself to the unconscious forces that are within you and that gave rise to your whole organism and continue to do so, and perpetuates the stream of your lived experience. That by doing this and really critically looking at oneself and recognizing that, yeah, we may be doomed to be desirous and to never be quite satisfied on a certain level, maybe we can transcend that level of dissatisfaction with life and desirousness by attaining to a consciousness which recognizes the total backstory of life, its mystery, and its autonomy. It's none of us individually decided that life altogether should have happened, or the universe should have exploded into the vast existence that it is. It just kind of happened, and it's the greatest mystery, along with our being aware of anything at all, that we neither chose to give rise to all existence, nor did we choose our own consciousness to be conscious. These things just kind of arose, and the more you reflect on how our individual consciousness arises, it just becomes more and more mysterious. With age, it seems to become much more acute, and one is in danger of getting so lost in that sense of individual self or individuality that you become blind to the whole picture of life, and you may not be bound back to that whole picture, and if you aren't, then your character may suffer for it, and you may suffer inside needlessly, because the experience of that connection to all things is always there. And I think people like Jung and Huxley believed that if you attend to and relate to your own lived experience properly in a way that's considerate and attentive and reflective, then there's a good chance you can be capable of executing this function and consequently attaining to a kind of childlike lightness and grace. Before I stop this video, I just remembered something that the commenter I'm replying to with this video said, was that I was talking about in my Secrets of Poetry video how exercising one's visionary faculty or imaginative faculty, whatever you like, inside, is a kind of superpower for the adult. But I didn't say the adult in the video, I just said it's a kind of superpower. So my commenter said that it's because I was saying how this faculty is just so naturally employed when we are children. We just so naturally and spontaneously see the flair in things and the excitement in things, and we're engaged with life in a real way. That's just so natural then, but with this growing sense of individuality and individual selfhood, we begin to lose that and start to feel like a victim of life and changes. He was saying that it's not really, that faculty is not really a superpower until consciousness is introduced, as in adulthood, when it's more differentiated, more present. And I believe that to be the case. It's some of the most bright and productive individuals who obviously are adults that we can think of, to my knowledge, did precisely what my commenter said and introduced a higher consciousness to their visionary or imaginative or fantasizing faculty, so that, for instance, they could produce fictions, or they could crystallize a vision of some building they want to make, or really, if we're just getting down to the basic thing that happens when you do this if you will, conjunction, or conjunctio as Jung calls it, is that you are able to participate calmly and confidently in life in a way that you can crystallize the visions that you want to see become actual in the world. Your imagination becomes productive outwardly, and you have a kind of freedom to creatively express yourself how you wish, because you've introduced a higher consciousness to that innate sense of imagination and wonder and awe that the child has, so that you can bring positive things into the world and maybe perhaps be something of an inspiration to other people, or just help out your community. It could be anything. You're able to envisage possible futures that you may be able to bring about, and you go about bringing them into the world, and it's just so very natural, because it should feel so right to you. Just whatever it is that you decide on to choose as a kind of creative or productive activity to add to the world and be a part of it. Whatever you choose, it should just feel so right inside, and even so necessary. And if I'm being honest, that's what writing and speaking on this channel are quite a lot like to me. And moreover, reading seriously complicated books that many people don't read. And it's if I can help to spread the influence of the ideas of some of these people that I read a little bit more, and maybe sway some people to delve into their work themselves, I am overjoyed to do that, because I am somebody who reads these books, and the sort of book I like is the one where you read something the author said and you don't get it immediately. You have to read it and read it again and read it again, and just every little element question why the author chose the specific words he did and placed them in the certain arrangements that he did. And the more you inquire into this, and the more you look things up, if you don't know what a word means, you don't know what who a person is or an event is, just be a philologist. Love to learn these things and just dive into them and learn as much as you can about what an author has said, so you can understand what he was trying to get across to you. So I'm at school now, so I'll probably end here, but I feel like this went pretty well. I may do this again. There's something to the driving and speaking that I really like, and I may return to this subject. This is kind of just an informal, I felt like I should respond to my commenter, because it was a great comment and I didn't want to forget to do it. So I may return to subjects like participation mystique again, and do it in a more formal way while, say, I'm at home or somewhere that I can have maybe some notes around me, or be able to do it in a more serious setting. So thanks for listening, guys. Have a good day. Love you all. Hey guys, one more thing before I go. You have no idea how many times after I make a video I think of things that I should have said during it that I forgot to say, and I thought of a couple of things while I was in class just now. And I'll try to keep it very, very short. A lot of the time, atheist, materialist types can be weirded out by any talk of spirituality or anything ethereal, mystic, divine, that sort of thing. But that does not mean that that sort of person is exempt from this participation mystique that Lévi-Blum and Jung speak of. And for that to occur, you don't necessarily need to experience some object, for instance, a religion, a doctrine, a group, a thing, an activity, or anything like that. You don't have to experience that as divine, but you have to be divinely attached to it. You need to invest a lot of energy and thought and care into it as though it were divine. And really, it's basically how I read Jung is a return to that divine experience and consideration of the divine and the mysterious nature we have inherited. That's the sort of thing. Just getting back to the pure experience of something special or meaningful is, if you can just get that by itself without trying to make your life meaningful with something that isn't really, but get to the experience of meaning itself, then that's how you escape participation mystique, and that's how you're not anybody's slave, and you're not draining your energy on useless things and activities that you've become so attached to, because you're looking for that divine sense of meaning, but you're trying to find it by becoming overly attached to somebody, something, some set of ideas, or whatever it is. It can be, as my commenter said, a very tribal sort of thing that gets you there, but it's, if you can restore that experience of excitement and engagement with life that the child has, and awake that kind of fantasizing and visionary capacity that children naturally have, and like I said, apply it to projects that you think are worth doing and should be carried out, it's you can become a very balanced, effective, and creative sort of human being who is a positive presence to other people if you don't look for some simulacrum, some pseudo solution to the problem of a feeling of meaninglessness and disconnect and isolation as an individual. So I'm gonna go. Okay, I swear, just one more way of putting it before I go. Believe in the existence of God or don't. Participation mystique is something like elevating something that is not God to the status of God and treating it as divinely important and investing yourself, your energies, your capacities into it as though it were divine, and thus wasting them. And this is what Huxley calls substitutes for liberation. And so they both saw a need for something like the individual returning to God. I mean, if you just want to use the word God in quotation marks to treat it as kind of something that points at what they're trying to convey, without accepting the existence of the gods that certain religions talk about, fine, go ahead. They're just talking about that raw, immediate experience of what Jung calls the numinous, or Huxley calls the divine ground. I just think they're both really good authors to draw on for this video about this subject, because it seems to be their primary concern that Jung says it, a society is nothing but the sum of its individuals, and to the degree that the individuals that comprise that society are not regenerated in spirit, i.e. to the degree that they have not found God, then that society will suffer accordingly. And that's why you find a lot of more religious type people concerned about our age, in that it's becoming more and more irreligious, and people are starting to doubt the existence of God more and more, because they see that connection, that first-hand connection of the individual himself with God as being of the utmost importance for the moral character of that individual and his psychic circulation and equilibrium. And now I'm going. So the video editor for my MacBook sucks. iMovie, just the one that comes with it. It wouldn't allow me to just post a still and silent picture into my presentation, so I have to make these videos, because if I take a still shot, it will do this weird thing where the text is moving all over the screen, and I didn't want that. It made it hard to read. So for those interested, just pause this video. I'll show this here, and then I'll scroll down, and if you're interested, read this, and you could just pause and read it if you like.